helping come out and support this first annual Content Summit. And I'd like to introduce the president of the Writers Guild, Patrick Barone. And also, real quick, he will be back at 3:30 for his panel. Zach Boone Kapow, the unrestrained innovator, how animation conquers unimagined realities through art, writing, and technology. So please come back for Patrick's panel at 3:30. But with that, I give you Patrick Barone.
Thank you for that smattering. I put my speech on my BlackBerry because I thought that would be appropriate for a digital summit. But I see that I won the Nigerian lottery, so I don't want to lose that email. Let me welcome you on behalf of the Writers Guild of America West to Digitally Enabling Storytelling, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of Producing Outside the Space-Time Continuum. Whatever that means. I hope you have a handle on that. I've attended several of the programs already this morning. Of course, the main question you should be prepared to answer is, how the hell does anybody make any money at this? And then secondly, there's really two very valuable lessons which I've learned so far. One is that digital television is absolutely cannibalizing traditional television. And two, that digital television is absolutely not cannibalizing traditional television. So we need to work out those issues. There is one truth, however, that has stood above it all, which is that in both traditional and new media, content is king. And for 75 years, the content creators in visual and creative arts have been members of the Writers Guild of America West. I'm told in the back of the room are two brochures, which you can take on the way out, describing the contracts that the Writers Guild has achieved in both original content for new media and derivative content of traditional. Thank you for applauding. That's nice. I take complete responsibility for it. Well, those of you who know, we were out on the sidewalks for about 100 days last year in order to get these contracts. So let's use them, shall we? For 75 years, we've been sort of that nonstop shopping for content creators. Television, film, and before them, radio writers have been the creators, the innovators, the gateway to the future of media. That is as much true now as it has ever been. They are Gutenberg, Shakespeare, Franklin, Marconi, Farnsworth, and Chayefsky all rolled into one. And whether their work is viewed through iTunes, YouTube, Hulu, Roku, Bebo, or some other Soviet-era typo, these Gut Shakes, Franconi, Werthevskys are the future and the link to the most important people out there, the new television audience on the internet, all 5 or 6 of them. So we thank these panelists for being here today, and on behalf of the Writers Guild of America West, thank you for coming. Break a leg. Allow me to introduce our moderator, Emmy and Peabody Award-winning filmmaker, Jeffrey Tuchman.
Thanks. This confusion between the new and the old seems to pervade this conference. I noticed that outside this room is a table that is offering half off the New York Times home delivery at a digital conference, which I find kind of interesting. At the same time, I was looking at Variety while I was waiting to come in here and saw that Samsung is funding a documentary about a rock and roll photographer, and they are following the festival circuit of this film with a phone that they've just come out with, which has a professional digital camera built into it. I think that those two kind of bookend the ends of the spectrum of what we're dealing with in 2009. So I wanted to go back a little bit in our production and storytelling history to a time when, the Panasonic DVX100, which those of us who make films are very familiar with, did not exist. High-definition video equipment was out of most of our reach, especially the tape decks, which cost the same as a Bentley. Final Cut Pro was a joke that was good for cutting 30 seconds, but not a documentary. There were no laptop editing systems. YouTube didn't exist. Making a website was an extraordinarily expensive and time-consuming process. You couldn't email a rough cut, and you couldn't fundraise on the web. And Facebook did not exist. That's 5 years ago. So in the last 5 years, there is no part of our process, of our storytelling process, that hasn't changed. From conception, research, fundraising, production, post-production, marketing. And we have an entire hour to discuss all of those things with an illustrious group of people here who represent the spectrum of storytelling in the nonfiction realm. So let me introduce them to you. Laura Nix, not necessarily in order, by the way, of anything particular. Laura Nix recently made a documentary festival hit, Yes Men Fix the World. Before that, she co-produced the documentary feature Tailenders, and she wrote and directed the award-winning narrative feature The Politics of Fur. She's the co-founder of Automat Pictures, and she's there produced, directed, or executive produced over 100 presentations. And her work has been shown pretty much everywhere. Jacob Rosenberg, to her right, is a digital technology expert and a filmmaker. He's the chief technology officer, a new incarnation entirely of a company called Bandito Brothers. Before that, he worked for a decade as the senior video consultant to Adobe Systems, and worked on such films as Superman Returns and Martin Scorsese's Rolling Stone documentary Shine a Light, James Cameron's Avatar, many other films. But just so you don't think he's a total wonk, he also is a director of, past and present, some of the best-known skateboarding documentaries that have been made, and is currently making a film about the famous skateboarder Danny Way. Adam Drucker is kind of a casting genius. His work is to find compelling characters for documentaries and television series and new media. He was the original casting producer on A&E's award-winning documentary series Intervention. He's worked for HBO and Lifetime, Bravo, NBC, and most recently he cast a pilot for a series that I'm working on as well for Showtime. Scott B., at the end of the table there, is a Peabody Award-winning filmmaker, and he's been doing it for 3 decades. Is that fair? He began in the 1970s creating what were truly groundbreaking films in Super 8 and 16 millimeter, and they're today recognized as seminal films in the New York independent film movement. For the past decade, he's worked as a documentary producer, a director, a cinematographer on films for National Geographic, Discovery, Lifetime, History, and the Learning Channel. And his career, both narratively and technologically, I think has spanned pretty much the entire spectrum. And we're very happy to have him here today. And finally, but by no means least, Eva Orner, who is an Academy Award-winning producer from Australia, now luckily for us, based in Los Angeles. And her Australian resume is too intimidating to discuss here, but I'll stick with what she's done since she got here, which is she's produced, among other things, with director Alex Gibney, the Oscar award-winning film Taxi to the Dark Side, and as well Gonzo, the life and work of Dr. Hunter S. Thompson. And that was just in the last, 3 years. So she's been very busy. So what we're going to talk about here is how, for all of these folks and for all of us, this meteoric evolution in technology has changed what we do and how, more to the point, how we do it. And I guess I'm just going to start off with a few questions directed at each of you, because I also have asked everyone here to bring a little sample of their work so that as they talk about what they're doing, we can all see what it is they've done most recently. I'm going to start with Laura. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
So we talked when we first discussed this about the notion that the effect of new technology on our process is kind of a mixed bag. What's the very biggest, most precipitous, most revolutionary change in how you do what you do that you can share with us? And before you do, I'm actually going to ask Thomas to just play a little clip from your most recent film, The Yes Men Fix the World. Of course, technology is not necessarily our strong suit here, so it may take a second.
Should I say a little bit about the clip?
Please do.
Okay, it's the beginning of the film, and I'll just show like a minute and a half or something of the first part of the film, and I'll talk a little bit about a part of it.
Go ahead.
For those of you who don't know, the Yes Men are a group of anti-corporate pranksters, and they had a film that was made by Chris Smith that was distributed by UA a couple of years ago. This is the beginning of the second film.
Are you ready? I'm extremely happy to be here because today is a very historic occasion for all of us at Dow, and I am grateful. Let's walk that way. I am grateful.
You're extremely pleased to be here.
I'm extremely pleased to be here. Yes, extremely pleased to be here, Steve.
This is my friend Andy. And my name is Mike. Today, I'm holding the camera.
And is it okay if I read something?
It's a good thing to know.
Exactly.
Andy is about to go on live television in front of 300 million people. They're going to think that he represents one of the largest companies in the world, which he doesn't. And that's why he looks so nervous.
Should I typically just look right into the camera? Okay. I see.
Andy's about to tell a really big lie, which unfortunately is going to wipe $2 billion off one company's stock price. But before I tell you this story,
1 minute.
I guess I should tell you how we got ourselves into this situation.
I know. I'd like to see the whole film, actually. So, tell me, going back to the first film that you worked on, the first documentary, and comparing it to this, how different was your process of making this film, given what we now have to work with?
Okay, so this film was directed by the Yes Men themselves, along with a co-director. So there were 3 directors, one of whom lived in Scotland and commuted to New York, the other 2 who lived in New York. There were 5 producers, 1 in Paris, 1 in London, 1 in Los Angeles, and 2 in New York, an editor in New Jersey. The composers were in Boise, Idaho, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The graphics person was in Los Angeles. The legal team was in New York. The clearance people were in Los Angeles. And this is really typical, I think, for a lot of productions now. And I have these kind of rose-colored glasses when I think about the first job I worked on back in public television a long time ago. I started as an assistant editor for a Frontline show and worked on American Experience and other shows for PBS. And I remember these like halcyon days of being in an edit room. It was on 16 millimeter. We cut the film on 16. As an assistant, it took me 6 weeks to sync the dailies of 100 hours of footage. And then we would edit the show for about a year, cutting on film. All of us together in one room, the producer, the director, the editor, the assistant, sometimes an apprentice. And it was just lovely. I mean, I think about that, and it was just so beautiful as I cut to what it took to finish this film. 3 weeks before we finished the film for our Sundance screening, we moved the post to London from New York against my protests, but that's a longer story. And we then had an assistant editor that was working in New York, but the film was being posted in London. We couldn't afford to bring the assistant to London. And we then got into this very involved process of FTPing, files of archive footage to the edit room in London. Music that was being composed in Boise and Milwaukee was being FTP'd to London. Files were being FTP'd, and then cuts were being sent back to producers and funders pretty much all over the world. But by the time you got a cut uploaded, and the time that it took to upload it, and then the time that it took to download, by the time we watched it and gave notes, it was irrelevant because the cut had changed. Now, I'm not saying that this is a good way to do things. A lot of people would say, wow, it's so modern. You can have everybody all over the world. Isn't that so amazing? And as we see a lot of work being sent overseas, I mean, I know that for people in animation, they're routinely working with work that's been outsourced to around the world. And feature films are also working a lot now with, your visual effects team might be in Bulgaria and you're doing the film in LA or, whatever. It's really quite common that you have these disparate pieces all over the world.
Is it a great thing? I mean, is it a great thing that you then have access to people that you would never be able to work with? Or is
this is the question.
Atomizing because there's no central conversation going on?
Yeah. I mean, when I was up at 4 a.m, on like a phone conference call and a Skype session at the same time with, 5 people spread over the globe trying to figure out this sync issue that we had with music and titles, I was like, this isn't progress, this is madness. I mean, this is completely insane. Like, this has not helped us to get to this point. And I'm not a Luddite, but...
Well, clearly not.
It does bring up the question of what do we lose? And I think that's the question that comes up for me about working digitally is what do we gain, but what do we possibly lose? And by deciding that we can smash the space-time continuum and it doesn't really matter and we can work everywhere and work with everybody in all these different time zones, what do we lose? And so I go back to that moment of sitting with 6 people in an edit bay making a film together and the kind of communication that we had, the kind of consensus that we had, the time that we had for reflection, the time that we had to look at cuts together, consider them together, was just, amazing. And I rue the days. I miss those days of being able to get back to something like that. So I'm a little bit on the technology ain't always so good side of things.
Well, what's interesting is in what you've just described, you've both told us the best and the worst in the same scenario. I want to ask Jake, having both started off in what I would consider to be kind of the guerrilla end of doc filmmaking with, I'm assuming, a PD-100 on the end of a stick, skating next to or with folks, and I mean, very few resources, but and then becoming the chief technology officer of a production company and having worked with Adobe. Tell us the good side of what Laura was just describing.
Well, I wanted to ask Laura if she felt like she slept better back then or now. I feel like I suffer from the exact same thing, and you always feel like you're progressing and you're moving into the future, but
Always
yet
felt
it's
better then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at some point, you're
Actually-
you're aging faster.
It's true.
Yeah.
Set up, if you would tell us, we're going to show a little piece of what you've brought as well. and then-
I have a lot of work that I've done over the years, but considering that one of the things that I take pride in with what I do with my company is really try to institute forward-thinking workflows, try to figure out complex workflows, working with multiple formats.
A term, by the way, we never used in filmmaking until like 5 minutes ago. Yes.
Yeah, I actually remember the first time when that became a term that you would talk about a process. But so for me, it's very important to be embracing what's next, to be looking at what's next. And a lot of people look at things like the red camera, which is fantastic from an image acquisition standpoint, but it's an absolute nightmare from a post standpoint. And it's hard to differentiate between the PR and what's real. So for me, as a filmmaker and also as a technologist, it's important to put my hands on the new tools. So I just finished shooting a commercial. This is for Dubai. And I shot it with the Canon 5D. From photography to delivery was inside of 2 weeks. And that included color correction and some 3D titles, and we delivered an English version and an Arabic version. So the Arabic version, maybe to most of you, I don't think would make sense. So I brought the English version in.
And the 5D is
The
sort of
5D
the
is-
cutting edge of image acquisition.
It is. It's the 5D is a gift. It's the same thing Laura is talking about. It's the plus and the minus. The plus is the fact that optically, from an imager perspective, if we think of digital imaging as having a lens in front of a gate, and that gate, the size of that gate dictates your resolution that you're recording to. Like a Canon digital SLR camera has the biggest imager in the business. And, the red cameras, even the HD cam cameras have very small imagers. So you're, acquiring big, beautiful, light through big lenses, but ultimately you're putting it on an imager that's inferior to what else is out there. So the positive thing was that Canon flicked a switch in their hardware to allow you to record video with this camera. And the result is that your depth of field...
You understand, by the way, for those of you who don't know, the Canon 5D is a still camera.
It's
It's a digital SLR, looks like a digital still camera, and it is. But it also shoots high definition, very, very high definition video.
And what it does is, because of the size of the imager, you're actually shooting the equivalent of 65 millimeter in terms of the depth of field that you can achieve. So one of the things that I talk about or teach people when they want to say, how do I make my video look more like film? You say you just use longer lenses so you reduce the depth of field. And that is, what conventionally you've been trained to do with film. So anyway, so you'll see we used a swing and tilt, and it was a job.
I think you have to play. Skipping over damaged area.
Anyway, what else? So with this camera, the other downside is the fact that it records 30p, not 24p, not 2997, but 30 progressive frames. So if you're shooting with synchronous sound, you have to adjust your sound by 0.01% to synchronize it with your 30p. From a documentary standpoint, from a filming standpoint, hopefully there's no one here from the location bureaus. To get a permit to shoot still photos is a fraction of the cost to get a permit to shoot film. And it's a still camera. And because it's such a great imager and such a good mechanics,
which we might actually get to see.
Maybe. I don't need to light it. I mean, the truth about this camera, which is, to me, as we say around the office, it's a game changer, is the fact that your base lighting from the sunlight is your base. It's not like you have to pump in 10K, 20K of lights and build your lighting as you would for a slow film stock or even a fast film stock. Because of the ISO ability on the digital camera, you can shoot at 800 ISO or 1600 ISO and not have a tremendous amount of noise. So, yeah, it's all right.
Unfortunately, the DVD technology is not quite as advanced.
But anyway, this was just one example of a job, and we used a swing tilt wheel to accentuate the narrow depth of field in it. But talking about that, if we can't see it, is not that relevant. But
Oh, there we go.
Of the worry. Speak to the region's biggest team of dermatologists. Get to know your skin better. For a free consultation, SMS Kaya to the following numbers.
Well,
I mean, if you
that's
played
extraordinary.
If you played again, the first shot on the beach is absolutely, there's no lights. It's practical light. There's no lights. That's natural lighting. And that, obviously, we built it for the master and went in and picked up the close-up in the same setup because we were already lit. And that's just one light coming in through the window with a little reflection. That's the same backlight. And again, the same setup. So you move so quickly. The biggest problem is the fact that this camera's not panavized. There's not a follow focus system and so forth. So we're working on a documentary / feature film with the Navy SEALs, and I think at one point we had every single Canon 5D in Los Angeles rented.
So you're actually shooting your documentary with this camera?
Every combat scene in our feature on the Navy SEALs is shot with 5D. That's the conventional approach that we
And the audio is recorded?
Audio is recorded to the camera and slated. And then
but how do you record with decent mics to a still
you
camera?
just do wireless lobs beneath the skin and send the bursts that all the cameras pick up, and then let the editorial department.
But that's right. But how are you actually getting it to the camera?
We're not getting it to the camera. We're recording it separately.
Oh, so you're recording double system.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, sorry.
That's what okay.
Sorry.
So that sounds like a nightmare, but on the other hand...
But that's the pluses and the minuses.
But the quality of these pictures, and also how much does a 5D cost?
$2,600.
$2,600.
And it blows, if pound for pound, that just destroys the red. Unequivocally. The other commercial I did was a beauty spot also for Dubai, and the red just gave us so much problems in post because it was so fine and it had that video-y feel. And it's just...
This is gorgeous. And understand that every frame of this is a raw, still photograph.
Well,
right?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. If you shoot in the 8 frame per second mode, the camera can only record so much raw imagery at a time. So when we're shooting at 30 frames per second, it's compressing the file. And this is... I won't go down that road, but it's an MPEG-4 compression format, which has its limitations. When you shoot in the raw mode, you can actually shoot 6K at 8 frames a second. So one of the things you can do is slow the shutter down, shoot 8 frames a second, and have an image that, again, is just,
It is amazing.
Yeah.
Are you storing it on the card?
Yeah, right now it only goes to CF cards that fit inside of the camera. And one of the things that we learned from our tests, and I'm always happy to share information because it's hard to come by, is there's a certain type of card that's a high-speed card. If you don't use the high-speed card, you get a lot of noise in your black channel for some reason. The compression isn't as efficient with a different card. So there's a certain card format you use. And the other thing that's a big gotcha is that if you were to go take this camera off the shelf and shoot with it, if you use Canon lenses, it would be in full auto mode. So your auto iris, auto aperture, and auto ISO would constantly be compensating for any lighting changes, which can be good, but it'll look like someone doesn't know how to use it.
It'll drive you crazy.
So if you use a Nikon lens with a Nikon to Canon adapter, you basically kill all the auto abilities of the camera. So
This one of the things that I have found happening is that there's a kind of Wild West feel to all of this. You're adapting and jury-rigging equipment to do things that it wasn't necessarily intended to do, and coming up with some extraordinary results. The same is true of other pieces of this process. I want to talk to Adam for a second, who is at a very different end of what we do, but who has also been in the position of adapting new technologies to do things that they probably weren't intended to do, but that I think has changed your process tremendously in the last couple of years. So I've actually asked Thomas to cue up a clip, and if you'd set up for us what we're about to see, and then we'll discuss.
If you can choose any of them. I guess Sylvia actually might be a good one to start.
Which one?
Sylvia.
Is that the first
This
one?
program contains subject
This is
matter
from
and
Intervention.
that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
It's not Sylvia, but it's
Don't judge me. I should be judged.
He looks like a walking corpse. Can't go on anymore. Just can't go on anymore. If I don't have my drink, screw you.
You're behind the wheel DUI, gonna injure some innocent party.
I have not done tonight.
Here's what's left of another pint. Lying, can't tell the damn truth. I'm sick and tired of it.
Why do you want to die? Why?
All the help I give just hasn't been what's needed, and this is it.
Unless you accept complete treatment, you'll be out of my life forever.
My name is Daniel.
Oh, my name is Adam.
His name is actually
Adam.
So without, I mean, obviously there are a lot of things that we could discuss about this, but obviously finding characters for a piece like this is, well, would you have been able to do it 5-10 years ago, and how would you have done it, and how are you doing it now?
Well, it's definitely, I think we would have been able to do it 5-10 years ago. And in fact, Intervention, when we started, was 5 years ago. And it was a difficult show to get up and running, as you can imagine, and to find the characters. But I would say within the last 5 years, it's been an absolute revolution in terms of what I do. I take another side to I see all the downsides, from Laura's perspective, but for what I do in terms of finding people, so much of what's important for the work I do is really research. It's really, in a way, recruiting and scouting and being able to reach people from all across the country. And so social networks, the internet, have been nothing but an incredible resource for me. And when we were starting Intervention, the only one really online, besides just like posting to different, groups, was Craigslist. I mean, that was about it at the time. Facebook didn't exist. MySpace didn't exist. Twitter didn't exist. LinkedIn didn't exist. And what we ended up doing, the way we sort of broke the code to find these people initially, was actually through old media. It was actually classified ads in newspapers across the country, just finding but it really took a really incredibly long time. And
you also had a huge staff working on it, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, we had an enormous amount of people, putting an enormous amount of effort to find the people, and just literally cold calling and getting a lot of hang-ups because at the time people weren't sure whether or not this was going to be something that was incredibly exploitive, and so people from recovery community were understandably concerned, and sometimes people were outright angry about it. But so it was much more sort of old-fashioned, kind of just like pounding the pavement, legwork, sort of detective work. And now casting a show like the one that we're doing now.
Well, let's talk about that. So contrary to Intervention, which was out of the gate was well funded, and Adam did have a substantial number of people with a lot of shoe leather and phone lines working on this day and night. Recently, he was asked to cast a pilot for Showtime, a documentary pilot involving folks who have lived their lives in the closet and have decided that they want to tell their story, share their story. And he was asked to do it with no resources, no staff, and no time. And it's only funny to tell you that because he succeeded nonetheless, and the magic ingredient ultimately was Twitter. So I will let him tell you a little bit about how that happened.
It was. I mean, Twitter's one of those things that people tend to either roll their eyes at initially or, proselytize about and go on and on. And but I definitely didn't have any real experience with it. And Twitter was a game changer for me in terms of this show. I was able to reach people from all across the country, from the smallest of communities and, the Bible Belt, people that felt incredibly isolated and alone. And so to me, a social network like Twitter or another show that I did in the fall for Bravo, we really used a lot Facebook, because it was about private school kids in New York City, and that was how they connected and communicated. Those social networks are incredibly valuable, and when you're working for no money or no staff or no time, it's incredible that I'm able to have those resources at my ability. But I mean, via Twitter, not only finding the people, but finding people literally all across the country who would then sort of volunteer their services to help out, because if they believed in the project or thought it sounded like something that they could, get behind. That was also really incredible. It's in a weird way, sort of like a grassroots, bottom up, I guess, Obama-y kind of thing. And I was really encouraged by it and thought it was pretty incredible. So I have a positive experience with it. I see the downsides too, but for me, for what I do, it's been social networking and technology has been incredible.
When I started, everything was on film. The first films that I did, we cut on Steenbecks. Then we moved up to did you call it Punch and Crunch here for the old...
Punch and Crunch? No, but I like that.
What did you call it here, before, when it was linear editing?
Linear, yes.
We used to call it Punch and Crunch, which is very Aussie. But, I remember doing a film, films in that way, and I remember our first non-linear experience and what a revolution that was. So all of that sort of seemed to happen in kind of an orderly kind of fashion. There were progressions, and then suddenly it just exploded. Maybe 8-10 years ago. I used to do narrative in Australia and scripted films and television series. Pre-internet. We used to. At the end of the days, we were faxing 150 call sheets out to the cast and crew every day. We used to employ someone who would just fax. and you would fax things out to people, and then you would have to call them all because faxes were notoriously unreliable. And if people didn't get their call sheets, they wouldn't know where to be at 6 o'clock the next morning. And, I think that was 12 years ago. To me, that's just insanity. But you know what? We did it. We were doing a documentary 15 years ago about people with physical disabilities and sexuality in Melbourne, Australia. Now, you would pre-internet, how do you find these people? We found them. Did we have staff? No, we did it. The director and I did it ourselves. It took a couple of months, really different situation. But it was more phone work, face-to-face work. It just took longer. Things took longer. And also you didn't have the sort of access. You can just uncover the most incredible stories, I think back then it was a little bit more like what you found you thought was good. I don't know that we used to be able to have the breadth and the
we didn't have the
deep
options.
Yeah, if you found something was pretty good, that was what you went with. So I think now you can have a little more flexibility. You can present more. I think one of the things as a producer, listening to everyone's stories, it can corrupt a producer in a lot of ways. It can corrupt producing in terms of, let's do a pilot for no money and you have to find us these people and you get no staff. But you can do it because of Facebook and Twitter. And so you see a lot of that kind of stuff happening where maybe 5 years ago you would have had a decent casting budget, now you've got $300, and I want 10 people next week.
Right, and like you say, actually, definitely it's not just, oh, that's good enough. It becomes...
What else have you got?
Exactly.
So you see a lot of that, particularly in television, I think it's fair to say. I think there's a little bit of that sort of corruption and a little bit of taking advantage of people because a 17-year-old kid could find me that, on a Thursday night. Like there seems to be that kind of expectation now that people want more. And something we were talking about earlier is, the sizzle reel. When executives always say, well, I need to see something when you're pitching a project. And I feel very, I was going to say twisted.
Exploited.
No, I feel very not sure about this because I've seen so many crap sizzle reels over the last few years. They're all, I was saying earlier, they're all so similar. People, you don't have really a budget for them. You pull footage off the internet or you just shoot a bit of average stuff. You throw on some music and some voiceover. And that's not a representation of what the show is. Last year I worked on a project with a large company, was participant, and they actually put up like a substantial amount of money for a sizzle reel, and this show didn't get up. We pitched it to every major network. I've done 2 sizzle reels, because I usually refuse to do them, over the last couple of years, and neither of them have got up. And every other project I've done over a 15-year history, that's gotten up has gotten up without a sizzle reel. So I feel like, if you're a first-time filmmaker, you've got nothing to show. It makes complete sense. I think if it's a completely character-based story and you need to show a sample of the character to sell it, fine. But, I'm a little questioning of the sizzle reel and the value of it because I think often there's no substance to it because, you know what, I'll cut you a sizzle reel when I go out and shoot 20 hours of footage.
I want to ask you about the pitching process for this, but tell us, I want to show a little piece of...
Taxi?
Yeah. Is that what this is?
That's what was in the TV.
Doesn't really? Okay, I can't really see the image from here. So, taxis. A lot of the big documentaries that I've done over the last few years that are feature documentaries that have substantial budgets, they happen in really different ways. People bring them to you. You come up with an idea and pitch them. You're working with people who know you and have given you the substantial budgets before. But what's interesting with Taxi is, it was something that we really struggled to finance at a time when people were giving us a lot of money to make documentaries because, 4 years ago, nobody really wanted to see a film about torture. And it was really interesting. We never really had a proposal. We never certainly had a sizzle reel. And in a funny way, we didn't even have our story for the first 3 or 4 months that we were making the film. We were shooting interviews, we were collecting archival material, but it took us a while to find what became the key story, which was the story of Dilawar, which is the taxi driver who was murdered, which became the voice and the emotional chord of the film. Before that it was really kind of like a frontline current affairs piece, but it didn't have the narrative heart to it. So it's interesting that with these sort of documentaries, sometimes it takes a long time to find that thing because they're so heavily research-based, and you need people to understand that. You need people to believe in you and say, we get it, here's your time. And I think that's something that's part of the storytelling process in documentaries that people have to understand. And I wonder how that will be affected over time.
Well, let's take a look at a little piece of this film. Doesn't look like Iraq to me.
It's like a nuke.
Yes.
There we go.
There we go.
That looks more familiar.
Just leave it. Oh, just yeah.
I want to watch the Eskimo film.
دوی ډېر کروڑ سړا و خپل کور بکړلو ځون ته خپل کور کو هغه کیسه منای دا ډېر اصیل سړا و ښه سړا و بالکل ټوله ورځ یې د هغه کاروبار وکړي وړي که سر شوه د هغه ټکټر یې ته کور بل کور یې نه و ټکټر کور یې ته برنډه تیږه چلوله کور بکړل دا دیوالونه دا تیږې دا ټوله دی غره نه راوړي دي د بل کور نه و نو ټیکسي خو داسې شولو چې موږ دلته مامپالي کوو مامپالو کور د کړله نه شو بیا موږ ته ووایي چې زه به د مامپالو کور کان ته څو ورځې ټیکسي وچلوم
Watching that, it's so funny thinking about all the technology and all the choices that you have as a producer. You know, the first couple of minutes of our film, there's barely anything we shot ourselves because, for various reasons, you know, it's either archival stills. We couldn't even get to Jacobi because when we tried to get to Jacobi, it was not a good time. So we had to send an Afghani crew off to do that. So, you know, it doesn't matter what it was shot on. It doesn't matter as long as you get the story. I think at the end of the day, you know, everyone can talk till they're blue in the face about new technology, but if you don't, I think it's a good example again in documentary. There's so much not quality stuff out there now because everyone has access to a camera, which is great because everyone can like make stuff. But at the end of the day, it's the story that matters.
How did you come upon that footage?
I mean, there's so much footage that we had to. There's a lot of classified stuff that we had to get our hands on, you know, without permission. You do whatever you can. You know, when you're working in an area, you have contacts at all different levels, and you know, we got access to so much stuff that hadn't been released prior to its release. So, you know, I can't tell you. I'll have to kill you. But I think, you know, listening to also your story of that whole international thing, I think, you know, there are projects when it's like you can either make this project and you have to have people in 15 countries and you won't sleep for 6 months, and that's your personal choice when you say, this is going to be a shit fight, but I'm going to do it. You know, and then on a normal job, or, you know, on most jobs, you can make those decisions. You know, we chose a composer, for instance, who was based in London because we liked him, and that was fine because it was one thing that had to be, you know, FTP'd and downloaded, and it was a pain, and there were delays and things went wrong and FedExing, but that was one thing. But if there were like 7 people like that, it would have been a problem. So, you know, but in this situation, that was our one concession. We wanted Ivor, so we thought, you know what, we'll have a little bit of technical problems for this reason. But I think as a producer, you know, you sort of make your limitations of what you're going to do, and it's similar with new equipment. You know, we had I think the 2nd or 3rd P2, the Panasonic cameras when they came out, and you know, there are problems. You know, we were using Avids, not Final Cut. Originally they were made for Final Cut, and you know, come the end of the film for Gonzo, we had some serious problems, and you take that into consideration when you use new technology. It's the same with the Red camera. I know so many people that are having problems, but when you use something new, you know there are going to be teething problems. So it's just all about, I think at the end of the day, you should just never compromise your film or your story. You know, take into consideration who you're delivering to, and you know, this is the producer's job. You sit down and you talk with experts on every level, and you make the call, and if things go wrong, everyone blames you.
The juggling process is very complicated between, you know, wanting the newest thing because it permits you to do things you couldn't have done before, and also permits you budgetarily to do things that you couldn't have done before, but at the same time, you add a layer of unpredictability to what is already an extraordinarily unpredictable process. I mean, unlike scripted, not that that doesn't have its issues, with documentary, you're following a story that is bound to evolve in a way that you never anticipated, and to add onto that the layer of technological unpredictability really creates, you know, some scary terrain, but also sometimes yields extraordinary benefits if you survive that. I
mean, at the end of the day, you know, in 15 years of making films, no matter what happens, there's always a solution. you know, the shit hits the fan every day on various levels, and that's part of what it is. It's problem solving, and it's making the best, you know, judgment. And I think, I mean, like, you know, this camera that I know very little about, it sounds fantastic, and so you get excited and you go and find out about it, and in 6 months it'll be a piece of junk that's redundant. That's just the way it is at the minute. I think we all just have to constantly be learning. Yeah. Exhausting.
Scott, you have, I think of you as having a somewhat unique perspective, even though you're just as young as the rest of us here, of having been doing this through a spectrum of, from a technological point of view as well as a content and artistic point of view, that really spans the spectrum of storytelling on film. I mean, you started out working on Super 8, or 8mm or Super 8? Super 8. So actually you didn't start right at the beginning. That was new technology too at the time.
I did 8mm and 16 too, but Super 8 was the kind of the breakthrough for me. And the same, and in a way, what I see happening now is kind of a continuation of what I thought Super 8 was going to be. I thought it was going to be this democratizing process that everyone would be able to shoot a film, go out. In fact, in my kind of circle of friends in New York, we all did. We just got Super 8 cameras and went out and started making films. And that's happening now.
Well, you described when we were standing outside the idea that the cameras were cheap, they were relatively easy to use, they were essentially prosumer or even consumer in the sense that people were using them for home movies. And editing, a Super 8 editing system cost like $150. Again, anyone could use it. So all of a sudden, there was this small window in which the means of production, which until then was Panavision 35mm studio fare, was all of a sudden in the hands of a bunch of artists on the Lower East Side, right?
Yeah. So it was this kind of we weren't worried about at that time in the late 70s, the culture was closed to people on the outside. So in a way, we were just making films for our own community in New York. And so it was a very kind of unique moment. But I think that what's happening now, it's not just the cameras, it's also the access to getting material that you have. I mean, people are shooting films on their cell phones and just posting them on the internet. And so you've got this huge democratization of the whole process happening right now. The piece that I brought along is actually kind of harkens back to my beginnings with Super 8 too, because in a way, what this is actually what we've turned into a sizzle reel, strangely enough. But it's something where we went out with a crew and couldn't make it happen, and I went back myself and shot for 5 days on this barge.
Alone.
Came back and downloaded 45 hours of footage into Final Cut overnight and cut the piece. So, I mean, this is a little piece of that, but you go ahead and roll it, and that'll give.
Secure, easy, free flow there, Sean. We're going to be burning out a window to determine if there's a grout backing inside the casing.
Sometimes a job seems deceptively simple.
We're going to be burning it basically a torch underwater, very hot, and we'll cut this very thick metal very, very quickly. So it doesn't play. It's definitely the big boy tool.
It's one of the more dangerous things the guys do, most certainly. Most fatalities normally involve that.
Everybody gets O2 pops, they call it an O2 pop, where you'll have a buildup of O2 and hydrogen and the flame hits it and getting hit with a hammer or something,
If you have a hydrogen buildup, once the spark hits it, we will have a little bomb.
Well, we had one of our divers have a pretty bad O2 pop, and I ended up smashing his helmet into his face and knocked him unconscious. And I know the standby diver that had to go get him, he thought he was dead when he got down there to pick him up. He was just floating in the water without his helmet on, and he quit after that.
You understand what we got going, right?
I got everything. I got the game set.
How's it coming, Brother Luke?
Y'all ready, Red? I think we're good to go.
Yeah, roger that.
Diver down, tower. Diver down.
All right, I'm leaving clear.
Roger that.
Wow.
And what is that? Is that a series? Or?
For a series, yeah.
And did you do that without it being sold, or?
Without it being, so we did this actually as a part of a development deal, but then now we're putting it together in different ways. So we recut this material as this is now to take it on.
So, in a certain way, what you're saying is that all this technology is now permitting you to essentially do what you started off doing 30 years ago.
And a lot better. I mean, and you can actually tell you can tell a story. You can shoot a film with two people. I mean, you can go out and make a documentary, make a narrative film, and then if, the problem right now is how to monetize it. How do you actually make your money back so that you can spend the time to make it?
How to any of you, how is all of this, from the research, the production, post-production, marketing, how has that changed the economic structure of do you budget projects differently than you did 5 or 10 years ago? Do you raise money differently? Are you able, what has been the sort of net effect on this? Is it very little has changed, or is it completely different?
I think what's really changed is like 10, 15 years ago, I think it cost a certain amount to make a 1-hour television documentary, or it cost a certain amount to make most theatrical feature-length documentaries, unless they had extenuating circumstances. And now to me, every time I budget a project, it's like, how much do I think I can raise? So I could do a feature doc for nothing or for $3 million. So it gives you that freedom, and it doesn't necessarily compromise the quality so much. I mean, obviously, big ticket items like archival music, but at the end of the day, you can still shoot, an HD doc for pretty cheap.
Now, that to me is tremendously liberating and democratizing. On the other hand, the problem is that, unlike even 5 years ago, it seems as though the people who commission, acquire, or fund whatever storytelling we do have now caught on to the fact that it is possible to do this work much faster, much, much cheaper, with far fewer people, and they're sort of squeezing that stone until...
Well, the value of your fee has been reduced potentially, unless you're working at the absolute top of the field.
And also the time. I mean, part of what, to me, when we were talking about what we've lost, to me, time is something that was a relatively inexpensive commodity at one time. It was very expensive to hire crews to shoot. It was very expensive to get in, pay by the hour in an online editing suite. But time, which was built into the process, if you sent someone a rough cut, it took 3 days to get to them. You had 3 days to think, to rewatch, to make changes. Now, all of this happens, as both Eva and Laura were saying, you by the time you've downloaded the rough cut from the FTP site, you've already changed the rough cut, and that can happen 3 times in a day. So that's the piece of it that I feel like we should be getting back, because we can do all of this so much faster. That's what I wish for. Let me ask you all, and then I want to open this up to all of you folks if you have questions. With all of these amazing sort of toys, from the social networks to the Canon that we're talking about, what is the thing you most want that we don't yet have, but that you would love to find, you'd love to open a magazine next week and see that they have finally invented, discovered, or developed something? What would it be? Jay?
Mass audience intelligence. I'm in great admiration of the people that I'm up here on the panel with, who've been doing this in the public eye and releasing far more work than I've done. But in my humble beginnings and in the beginnings of our company, we are aspiring to make good work, and the legitimacy of raising money to do what you feel like is good work it's a very tough landscape out there. And to that point, you have to cut costs, you have to be very lean, and we try to, as a company, be vertically integrated so we don't need to go anywhere else to get anything done, from shooting to releasing. But I find that that's the biggest obstacle, is just having a great idea and being able to believe in it. I mean, at the end of the day, I think, not to talk about our company, but our goal for it was ultimately we want to be a content destination, and that our brand has a style and a type of content that's associated with it, so that people would expect something. And when you ask, how do you get the jobs and the work, and how do you differentiate, and when budgets come down, it's ultimately you have to sell what your vision is and what makes you different from someone else. Not better or worse, but different. So I would hope that someday, there is a National Endowments of the Arts or whatever that is much more willing to take risks like some other countries have, and that we pay more respect to intelligent programming and intelligence in media.
I guess the risk-taking that you're talking about, while obviously I think all of us would love to be in the position where we found someone willing to write a check based on the possibility that something could be great, but that didn't match an existing model, paradigm, whatever. At the same time, my sense from everybody here is that although we're the ones taking the risks, our ability to do that has exponentially increased. I mean, that all of us are able to embark on projects and take them far enough so that we do, Eva was talking about people saying, show me something. It's true that, I find very rarely can we pitch a project now without having tape. And the assumption is that we're able to go out and do what Scott did, not necessarily as well, but, and actually have something to show. A characters, a style, because to me what I've found that's really changed is that ideas used to be the currency, and now execution has become much more the currency. And that's been able to happen for good and bad because we have access to all of this infrastructure. We can do this stuff on our own.
My standard line when people say, show me something, is imagine something.
Really, how does that work for you?
Not so good.
Does anybody out there have any questions for this amazing group of people? Yes, and then I'll come to you.
Okay. I actually have two questions. The first question is...
Could you stand up so that we can all hear you?
I have two questions. One question is for the panel in general, which is something that Laura kind of touched on early on, which is, has the speed at which, what you were just talking about a minute ago, the speed at which we have to now create films and get them all the way through post and distribution, for you as creative people, has that taken some of the joy out of the process of making films? Because the process of pre-production and production is oftentimes the most creative element of filmmaking. And then specifically for Adam, I was wondering if you could talk specifics about how you use Twitter and Facebook for the casting. I myself have tried to use those social networks in similar ways, but have a hard time getting outside of the network that you already have. Right. So I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts.
So the question, for those of you who couldn't hear, the first question was whether the speed with which we're now able to do this and being asked to do it has taken some of the joy out of the process. And the second question, which was for Adam regarding Twitter and its use, I'm actually going to let Adam answer that after the panel for you. But has this become a less joyful? Are we looking, as you said, Laura, through rose-colored glasses at the past, or is it really less enjoyable now than it was?
I really think it depends, obviously, on what project you have. And I work on some that have budgets and some that don't. And I think that when you're working in a low-budget manner, you're more challenged. Things have to become faster in order to get it done for no money. So, and it's not like the Yes Men is a very joyful project, and I'm very happy and thrilled that it exists and it's out in the world. But it looks very different than if you're working on a budget that's funded. And getting things funded is a very difficult. I mean, it's almost a whole different panel. I mean, it's a very, very different landscape than what it was, and because the process has been democratized to the extent that it has, I think that people who are, been making work for longer, it can be challenging to get funding for your work in the way that we used to, because there's a lot of people who can do it for cheaper than
some
you.
of us are spoiled by having had the opportunity over time to work on projects that were funded well and had long-term schedules. And on the other hand, now many more of us can do this, but not with the same. So in a sense, the word democratizing is, in both its best and its worst interpretations, is legitimate.
It seems to change the emotional dynamics. Like, I think if you have a project that doesn't have a lot of money, you still experience, or you have these, severe limitations. Orson Welles has a great quote about limitation being the impetus for creativity, and you still have those aha moments. And it's like, we all know the sensation of being happy, but we can be happy as a result of a number of different things that we've never experienced before. So, for myself, the kayak commercial has been a nightmare. And I'll be candid, we shot it for $60,000. We had 6 locations. We had 6 actors that we had to buy. We had a crew. And we kept it very lean and mean. And it was absolutely stressful dealing with another country that's, 12 hours away and doing exactly what Laura was talking about. And because we have good post capabilities, just absolutely being raked over the coals for our potential. But to be able to shoot something, you get so happy because you have nothing and you made something from nothing, where you probably wouldn't have that same emotion if you maybe had all this time and all this money, and then you're sitting there going, well, I don't have what I want. So I think I love your question, because I think that ultimately it's the same. It's
just different pieces
just different.
of the process.
It's a great recipe. It just
what you're saying is you love having made the piece, as opposed to necessarily
thank God for that.
Making.
Just to do something.
I like to say it's akin to like working out. like that when you're doing it, it's a pain in the whatever, fit literally, but that a lot of times afterwards you feel great. And I think because of having to work with fewer resources, and sometimes it really feels physically painful, and it's incredibly difficult. But then you also building strange muscles, like something like Twitter. So to answer, that leads me nicely into it, is that like I'd never been on Twitter, I'd never used it before, but because I had to do more with less, as it were, I ended up having to be really resourceful. And so while it might have been incredibly difficult and challenging and frustrating, at the end of the day, I ended up finding something that I can use,
next time.
In a lot, next time. And just in terms of Twitter, yes, it's show to show, it's all different. MySpace drove me nuts. For say Survivor, Amazing Race, sometimes we would look on MySpace. You couldn't necessarily get in because they're private, and it would crash your computer because MySpace drove me. I don't know. Sorry if there's anyone from MySpace here. It drives me crazy. But say Facebook for the Bravo show, that was closed. Most people's pages are closed. However, if you get into, if you're sort of vouched for, which is sort of like you meet the people that are in that circle or community, then one person sort of introduces you to the next. And the thing about Twitter that is greater than those for casting is that there isn't sort of a closed element. People might block their stuff, but what you can end up doing is just sort of following the people that you want to sort of target, so to speak, and then they might follow you back. But so Twitter might be a really good resource for you because MySpace and Facebook, they're closed. The other thing is LinkedIn was helpful.
I'm gonna interrupt you just because we only have like a couple of minutes left, so I'm gonna this young lady with a question.
Kind of confused why you had to go all over the world to find the resources. I mean, Los Angeles has got a plethora of people in almost every discipline of this business and willing to work for, in a lot of cases, next to nothing. Mm-hmm. So when you sort of broke down the different, people that you were looking for, I'm thinking, man, I'm constantly bombarded with people saying, what do you know? Who do you know? How do I get involved in a project? I'm thinking, it's going to Boise now? I mean, you got to be kidding me. So I'm just curious, why?
Were you outsourcing?
Well, you need to outsource. It just seems. I mean, I can see if we really had a shortage here, but it's just so opposite and probably more than ever.
Yeah. Well, The composers in Boise, they were actually musicians in Boise, and what they did is that the guys really fell in love with this song, the Get Happy song that Judy Garland sang that we use in the opening sequence. And that's a really expensive song to license, and we couldn't get anywhere. I mean, it would be like the budget of the film to license that song. So we were able to get, one of our producers, Doro Backrack, was able to get a really amazing rate on the publishing of it. And we found a music supervisor in LA who agreed to work with us for free, knew some people who could do big band stuff in Boise that were just really great. The cost, like this much of what it would cost to hire the equivalent in Los Angeles. And again, this is all low-budget solutions, right? I mean, if we were doing it in a quote-unquote real way on a normal project, it would be very different. All of those resources exist here in LA, but it's a matter of getting people to work for very little to no money and do it and turn it around immediately. And that's, it's the triangle, the cheap, fast, good, you get 2 out of 3. So when you've got a film that's ready to go to Sundance in like 3 weeks, and I mean, it needs to be up on the screen and finished, your options are limited, and you get 2 out of the 3, so which one are you going to compromise on? And, ours was that it couldn't be local. But also with a project that's divided all over the place, what's local? I mean, there was no, locus, really. New York, kind of, but...
Well, I personally have a lot of questions for this group, but unfortunately I'm being told that we're reaching the end of this discussion. So I thank you all so very much for coming. And to the panel, thank you very much for your time.